Washington Journal continues.
Joining us now from Texas, near the Mexican border, is Mark Krikorian. He is the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies, here to talk about the Biden administration's border and immigration policies. Mr. Krikorian, what is the situation like on the border from what you've seen? Where have you been in your time down there?
We've been down here all week, and we've been to McAllen and Brownsville and various communities there. So this is the farthest south and east part of the border, sort of the end of the Rio Grande before it empties into the Gulf of Mexico. And what we've seen is, lots of border wall, lots of law enforcement that we've talked to that have said this is really the worst they've seen it. I mean, the Border Patrol agents down here tell me they're catching, 1,000 people a night just in one section, or not just a night, but a day, just in one section of this southern part of the border. Admittedly, this is the busiest part of the U.S.-Mexico border now. And they are just terrified about what might happen if and when this Title 42 rule that is related to COVID is lifted. It was supposed to be lifted May 23rd, and it now allows Border Patrol to just turn people back without hearings or anything. About half of the illegal immigrants they catch are expelled that way. And it looks like, at least from a judge's order, it might not be lifted until later. In other words, he's postponed the end of that Title 42 order, but it is going to end at some point. And it's not clear that DHS is prepared or even interested in actually stopping the enormous expansion of the flow of people we're going to see when that happens.
You said the border agents are telling you that it's the worst they've ever seen. Why? Who's coming across?
There's basically two kinds of people coming across. One are usually families who are taking advantage of the administration's lax policies to turn themselves in. So they aren't eluding the Border Patrol, they're crossing illegally, but then flagging down Border Patrol agents. They get processed. We went by one of these processing centers. We couldn't go in, obviously, but saw it from the outside yesterday. And then they're given some, they take their pictures and what have you, given some paperwork, and they're dropped off at the bus station or at the airport to go and join their relatives who often funded their smuggling route to begin with. The other group, though, that's about roughly something like half the illegals that are coming across the border. The other half are people who don't want to be caught. And they actually have an easier time of succeeding. The ones who get by are called gotaways because they got away. And the administration, DHS, has a not infallible, but pretty good way of tracking that because there's lots of cameras now. And even if the Border Patrol doesn't get somebody, they often will know that the person did pass. They will see the person went. The problem, of course, is, and the reason they often don't get caught, is Border Patrol has been so overwhelmed by processing all these illegal immigrants who are turning themselves in order to maybe make often baseless asylum claims, that there are often stretches of the border that have nobody patrolling them. And so it's easier for the second group, as it were, the ones who don't want to be apprehended, to actually get away with it, as well as drugs or any other contraband to get through, because the border is much more poorly, or let me put it this, less well patrolled than it was before this surge in so-called asylum seekers began.
Mark Krikorian, I want you to respond to the Homeland Security Secretary. He was testifying earlier this week. He defended his agency's record on the border. Here's what he had to say.
We inherited a broken and dismantled system that is already under strain. It is not built to manage the current levels and types of migratory flows. Only Congress can fix this. Yet we have effectively managed an unprecedented number of non-citizens seeking to enter the United States and interdicted more drugs and disrupted more smuggling operations than ever before. A significant increase in migrant encounters will strain our system even further, and we will address this challenge successfully. But it will take time, and we need the partnership of Congress, state and local officials, NGOs, and communities to do so. To build on our ongoing work in this budget, we have requested funding to hire 300 new Border Patrol agents, the first increase since 2011, to ensure the safe and humane treatment of migrants and to operationalize a new rule on asylum processing. We are requesting additional funds to counter human and drug smuggling operations, combat the heinous crimes of child exploitation and human trafficking, and stop goods produced by forced labor from entering our markets. Finally, our mission set includes a series of other essential priorities. DHS, through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, protects our critical infrastructure from malicious cyber activity, a threat heightened due to Russia's unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Our budget will expand our cybersecurity services, bolster our ability to respond to cyber intrusions, and grow our cyber operational planning activities. DHS, through TSA, protects the traveling public. Our budget invests in paying TSA's dedicated personnel commensurate with their federal colleagues and ensuring they receive employment protections.
Mark Krikorian.
Well, a couple of points. Before we even get to the immigration point, the Secretary referred to all these other things, cybersecurity, airport security, what have you. That really does highlight how the Department of Homeland Security just is dealing with too many things. We need to have a separate department dedicated just to the immigration issue, whether it's enforcement, whether it's green cards, the whole thing. There really needs to be a Department of Immigration, because otherwise what you end up with is immigration being lost in midst of all of these other things. But then specifically about the Secretary's comments on the immigration and border issue, the huge increase in the number of people coming across the border. They call them encounters. They just came up with a kind of PC term. What they mean is apprehensions of illegal immigrants, is due to the administration's own policies. The administration has requested less money in that budget that the Secretary touted, less money for detaining illegal immigrants, holding on to them until their hearings to make sure they don't run away. The administration has drastically reduced deportations, including deportations of criminals from inside the country. And it has expanded the grounds that it gives asylum to illegal immigrants who ultimately would get citizenship, all of which and other things put together add up to an incredible incentive for people who want to move to the United States but have no right to do so, to do it illegally, turn themselves in once they cross the border, and then they will be let go. At the end of the day, if they get turned down for asylum, and most will, even under the new rules that the Biden administration has put in, many of these people will be rejected for asylum because their claims do not meet the standards in the law. There is zero chance under this administration that any of them will be made to go home. So what it boils down to is that if you can get across the border, especially if you have a child with you, you have a very high chance of being released into the US. And once that happens, you have a very high chance, almost a certainty, that you will be able to stay here the rest of your life. That kind of incentive means there will be an enormous number of people trying to come across no matter what you do, which is why border security has to happen at the border with fences and all the rest of it, but also has to happen inside the country by weakening the incentives that would draw people to illegally cross the country. This administration is creating the conditions for lots of people to come across the border, and then claiming that it's a solution to reduce the pressure at the border, and it doesn't. It's only going to get worse until they change their policies that attract potential illegal immigrants.
Before we get to calls, Mark Krikorian, remind our viewers what's the mission of your organization and what does your group think needs to be done on the border?
Our group is the Center for Immigration Studies, CIS.org. And we are a think tank. We don't have members and, we don't tell people to call their congressman, that sort of thing. But our goal is public education on immigration. And our motto is fewer immigrants, but a warmer welcome. We think immigration law needs to be better enforced, and immigration laws themselves need to be changed in order to dial back on the level of immigration. We take 1 million plus legal immigrants in an ordinary year. It was less during COVID, but it'll be bouncing back this year. And that's too much. Conditions have changed in the world and in the United States. We have a different economy, we have welfare state, all kinds of things mean that immigration, which is a federal government program after all, like the Air Force or farm subsidies, needs to be downsized from the levels of 1 million plus a year legal immigrants that we are now taking in.
Peter in Valley Cottage, New York, Republican. You're up first. Go ahead.
Good morning. Mark, appreciate everything you're doing, but unfortunately, this is an effort in futility. President Biden said during his campaign that this is exactly what he was going to do. I hear Republicans and on conservative news outlets how the American people don't want this. Well, this is what they voted for. Okay, Mark? And President Trump had to fight tooth and nail to get money to secure the border. The truth is there's only a handful of Republicans who really are against all this illegal immigration coming over. Even down in Texas, Governor Abbott is going through this kabuki process where he's putting military on the border, which isn't doing anything. I believe that Governor Abbott can stop this on his border if he really wanted to, because under the Constitution, if the federal government fails to do its job, the state has the right to protect its border. This is all phony. Most Republicans, even Matt Gaetz said that, most Republicans are in favor of all this illegal immigration. Because
okay, let's take that point, Peter.
I appreciate the caller's sentiment, but first of all, despair is a sin. It's never over. This can, in fact, be dealt with. And in defense of Governor Abbott, and I'm not a voter in Texas, so I don't really have a dog in this fight, there's a limit to what states can do. And the governor has been doing a number of different things. Like he said, there's been Texas National Guard on the border. We've run into them all week, every day practically. And there's a limit to what they can do. They can't usually arrest people. They can just call the Border Patrol, but they're extra eyes and ears. The other thing that the governor did that I think hasn't gotten as much attention is he essentially shut down truck traffic across the border bridges from Mexico. And that is enormous amount of truck traffic coming across. And he used his power to do safety inspections to do that. And immediately, the Mexican governors on the other side, Texas borders on 4 Mexican states, rushed to Austin to sign agreements with Texas that the Mexican states on their side would do what they can to slow illegal immigration. Now, maybe it won't work. Maybe they're not telling the truth. But the fact is, the governor is doing what he can. And if the majority in Congress were to change next year, as is likely, at least in the House of Representatives, there is, again, some more that Republicans at the national level would be able to do. But ultimately, the root cause of this border crisis is sitting in the Oval Office. As the caller kind of suggested, people didn't necessarily vote for that because neither President Trump nor candidate Biden ever really talked about immigration during the campaign. It simply wasn't all an issue. It's going to be an issue this November, and it's likely to be an issue in 2024, and then we'll see what the electorate actually thinks about it.
In Chicago, Sharon, Independent.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm in the Chicagoland area, and it's kind of sad. It's the hospitals are overwhelmed with just lost-looking people. It's very sad. A lot of people wandering around, just kind of living at truck stops, and it looks like they're living around the hospital. And it's very, very sad. I mean, I want to help both Democrats and Republicans understand that as a white person or whatever, I get so offended about white flight and, white supremacy crap, because you need to understand it's a culture clash. Anytime, America was formed and everyone stayed in their groups, the Italian group, Chinese group, Jewish group, or everyone had their similar cultures, and I think our United States was built by cultures, and the white European culture is very old, I don't want to I was here, most families were here after the turn of the century or so, 1880, 1890.
Okay, and so Sharon, your point?
Yeah, well, we have no connection to slavery whatsoever, and we don't. It's not a hatred of other kinds of people. It's just you're used to your culture, and when there's another culture coming into your area, it's very hard. So I feel bad for the immigrants that come here too. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Mark Krikorian?
Well, I'm not sure there was if I would get an immigration policy point out of that, it's that newcomers of any kind coming to a different place are themselves have a hard time fitting in, and the community has a harder time fitting the newcomers into it, which is one of the reasons whoever they are and wherever they're going, immigration needs to be at a low level so that both the newcomers can successfully fit in and the community can successfully integrate them. When you take too many people, whoever they are, wherever they go, it becomes hard for everybody to fit together and get along. And so a more moderate level of immigration is better for those people who end up coming and for the communities that they end up going to.
Michael in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Democratic caller.
Yes, hi. Two things. One, remember, Mr. Krikorian, that immigration laws were put into place to keep minorities out of the United States, starting with the Chinese and later on anybody not from Western Europe, pretty much. But my question for you is, what is Congress actually doing about the problem? I don't see them making any suggestions. Another thing, it was mentioned that the immigration, the number of employees hasn't changed since the 1970s, I believe, or 2005 or earlier. In other words, there are not enough employees to apply all these ideas that you're putting forth in terms of controlling the border. There's not enough employees to control the border.
Okay.
And then finally,
understood that point, Michael. I'm sorry. And finally, what?
According to my understanding, the United States prospers as a result of more immigrants. For example, in the food packing industry, the United States prospers with more immigrants, not fewer immigrants, sir. Thank you.
The fact is that our economy does get bigger with more immigration. That's just almost like a tautology. In other words, if you have more people, the economy is bigger. There's no question about that. The question is, do the people who were here before do better themselves individually when there's more immigration? And that's not clear. The National Academies of Sciences did a huge report on this a few years back. And what they found was that, like any government policy, immigration creates winners and losers. Some people benefit, other people don't. And what they found, without going into the whole long spiel, is that there was a small net benefit to the country from immigration. In other words, the pluses and minuses, you put them together, it ends up being a relatively small plus. The problem is that the minus part, the people who pay the costs of immigration, are the least able to do so. The poorest and least skilled people in our country experience a reduction in their earnings, while everyone else in the country experiences a very slight increase. And so when you put it all together, it comes out to be a small benefit, but it's a benefit that is the result, if you will, of a reverse Robin Hood policy. Mass immigration is a reverse Robin Hood policy that impoverishes those who are least able to take it, and and gives a little bit of benefit to the whole society. So if you think that's okay, and there are people who do, business lobbyists and what have you, fine, be honest and say it. I don't think it's right to harm the poor in order for everyone else to get, a very small net benefit.
On Congress, Mark Krikorian, his question about what they are doing. I'm also curious what your group could agree to in some sort of bipartisan immigration overhaul, something many Congresses and many presidents have talked about for years.
The problem, is Congress hasn't passed meaningful immigration legislation in a long time. And that's not because, they're all lazy or stupid or anything like that. It's because there is a fundamental disagreement about immigration. And it's not, when you look at Congress, that disagreement isn't really all that clearly between Republican and Democrat. That's why the talk of a bipartisan solution doesn't really mean anything, because what the past bipartisan proposals that were championed by President George W. Bush and President Obama that failed is that they were Democrats who supported high immigration and loose enforcement of the borders, joining with Republicans who supported high immigration and loose enforcement of the borders. So it was bipartisan in that they had different letters after their names, but there was no compromise in any meaningful sense. They just got together to promote higher immigration and looser enforcement. And so the problem is that they fail over and over again because immigration, broadly described, in other words, the whole issue, isn't really as much a right-left issue as some people think, as it is an up-down issue, where our leadership classes, whether they're in politics, business, academia, media, what have you, elites, but that's kind of become a loaded term, but our leadership classes have one view, which is more immigration is better and borders should be relatively loose. Whereas the public, and again, much of the public across the spectrum, believes that immigration probably should be somewhat lower and that borders should be tighter. And so that's the disagreement, the up-down disagreement that matters in politics. The right-left disagreement is what you see in, or what people talk about in Congress, but just isn't as relevant as a lot of people think.
Barb in Pennsylvania, Democratic caller.
Yes, 2 points. I understand that an immigration law almost passed in 2013, 2014. I wish that C-SPAN or this gentleman would comment on what was in that bill, and could we tweak it? Do we have to reinvent the wheel? And the second point is, he keeps saying that the problem is in the Oval Office. I believe that President Biden is following the international amnesty laws. He doesn't have a choice. International law says that when someone comes to your border, you have to give them a chance to request amnesty. So could he comment on those 2 points? Thank you.
Sure. Let me touch on the first one. What was in the bill in 2013, 2014? That was the Gang of Eight bill, for those of you who were following along at the time. And it was very similar to the bill under several bills under President Bush that also failed. And what the Gang of Eight bill, which is now, 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, would have done, would have been to legalize, to amnesty the illegal immigrants who were here in exchange for, or combined with, huge increases in future immigration. And that's one of the reasons it failed. Public opinion polling shows that there actually is broad support for legalizing, amnestying people who've been here a long time, have put down roots and aren't murderers or drug dealers. And I frankly support something like that under some conditions myself, but that doesn't ask the important question, which is, if we legalize the people who are here, what about, will there be another amnesty? In other words, will enforcement be sufficient to prevent future mass illegal immigration? And then 10 years down the road, we'll be right back where we started from. And none of the proposals that have been put forth actually address this issue. They all legalize the illegal immigrants first, and then promise that in the future, they will enforce the law better. That was the same model that the 1986 amnesty bill, way back under President Reagan, which actually did pass. It's the same model. And what happened is the illegal immigrants all got their legal status, and the enforcement never happened. And that betrayal of that bargain poisons immigration debate to this day. And if I could just touch on the second point, she was saying amnesty, what she meant was asylum. And there are, in fact, international asylum rules, but it depends on how you interpret them and apply them. And this administration has gone beyond what federal law and certainly beyond what our international agreements require. For instance, the treaty that the international treaty, the UN treaty, the US signed onto, that is the basis for asylum law, says that an illegal immigrant does indeed have to be considered for asylum. You can't just say, no, you don't get asylum just because you're an illegal alien. But the provision of that treaty says that only applies if the person has come directly from the country where they were being persecuted, which is to say something like a Ukrainian going into Poland. What we're seeing on our border is almost everyone who claims to be an asylum seeker has passed through multiple other countries where they could have and should have applied for asylum, but did not. They are they're economic migrants in effect, because if you pass through 3, 4, 8, 12 different countries before you get to the US border, you're no longer really an asylum seeker. Now, under our current policies, they still get to apply for asylum, but the administration previous to this one, the Trump administration, did put in regulations to require people to apply at other countries before they got here. And those regulations have all been canceled by this administration. So this administration is not, it's not handcuffed by international rules or even national law. They are choosing to do what they're doing at the border.
You're referring to the Remain in Mexico policy?
Well, not specifically, but that's one of the things. There was something called the Remain in Mexico policy that, again, under current federal law, illegal immigrants requesting asylum either have to be held in detention during the entire course of their proceedings until they get a decision, yes or no, or they have to be made to wait outside the country. That's what the Remain in Mexico program. This administration, one, does not believe in detention, in fact, asked for less money for the coming year for detention, less space, and tried to end the Remain in Mexico program. A judge stopped them from doing that, but they have only complied with that judge's order in a very small way. Literally, only a few hundred people have been put back into the revived Remain in Mexico program. So the administration is still basically just letting people go once they make an asylum claim.
And the Supreme Court heard this case, the Remain in Mexico policy case, earlier this week. You can find it on our website, cspan.org. Mary Lou in Newington, Connecticut, Independent, we'll go to you next.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
So are you telling me that every president that comes into that office can change the law under his say-so? I mean, who makes the laws in the country? I thought that Congress made the law, and if somebody didn't like it, they went to the Supreme Court, and it sounds like that happens sometimes. But did Biden come in and say, forget all the laws that any president except me is making, and I will say that anybody who wants to come to this country, if he can get to the border, can come across, and we will take you to any place you want to go. Is that the law that Joseph Biden made? I mean, who makes the laws?
Okay. All right, we'll take the point.
Sure. Congress obviously makes the laws. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be anyway. But in any area of law, and immigration, you'll see this a lot, Congress will set the rules, but any administration has a lot of wiggle room within those rules. How do you interpret what this meant? How do you write regulations to put Congress into effect? Once you regulate, what are the policies you tell your guys out in the field to do? The fact is that in immigration and, well, any kind of law enforcement, but immigration especially, the executive branch, the president and his employees, have lots of wiggle room, lots of discretion in how they implement the law. And in fact, sometimes they even will go beyond their authorized wiggle room, if you will. That's when you get lawsuits. And in fact, there's a significant number of lawsuits against the Biden administration. A new one just dropped this week, I think, from various attorneys general in a bunch of states about a rule about asylum that would make things much worse at the border. But so the basic point is, yes, Congress establishes the framework, but the president and his subordinates are the ones who put that into effect. And if you have a president who doesn't believe that immigration limits are right, are morally right, and this administration does not believe that saying no to people from abroad is acceptable, they think it's immoral to do that, there are all kinds of things they can do to subvert the law that Congress passed.
We'll hear from Harry in Pittsburgh, a Republican. Question or comment here? Go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, nobody has a problem with people coming into this country, but there's a right way to do it. Now, all my grandparents came from different countries. I grew up in a neighborhood where people came from Italy, Greece, Germany, and Poland. They all spoke English when they got here. My grandparents had to learn that. There's just too many. And for Biden, this guy McCord, whatever his name is, he's telling us not to believe our lying eyes when we see pictures of how many are coming over. And all these kids are getting tossed away. They're dying. People are getting raped. What they ought to do is like they used to go, one law, go to an embassy, apply, have it sent to America, maybe take 100,000 a year at a time. In 10 years, that's 1 million people. And do it the right way. Make sure these people are educated, you know where they came from, you know their background. How many times have people in the last few years got killed by illegal aliens coming to this country? There's just one in New York where a guy killed some woman. He had her in a duffel bag. That's all everybody's saying.
All right, Harry, understood the point, and I'll just add to that Dave in Dalton, Georgia, who sends a text. How many illegal aliens are in the U.S.? 11 million or 22 million? Why don't we enforce the laws we already have? No need for comprehensive immigration laws.
I think there probably is a need for changing the law, but indeed, we need to enforce the law first. And just to touch on this point about the number of illegal immigrants, we actually have looked into the various estimates, and we made our own estimate recently, and it is something like 11, maybe 12 million, maybe if we're wrong, it's 13 million, but it can't be 22 million or 30 million illegal immigrants. There are some estimates like that, but we actually think they're flawed. We published on this at CIS.org, and just without going into details, one of the big reasons we think that these huge, bigger numbers, 20, 30 million, double or triple the current real population of illegal immigrants are not correct, is that if there were that many extra people, you would see it in the death records, in the birth records, in the school enrollment records, in the grocery store statistics. In a modern society, you can't misplace 10 or 20 million people. You can misplace 2 or 3 and not keep track of them, 2 or 3 million people. That's possible. We're a big country. 10 or 20 million people, you would notice. So I think it's almost certain that something like 11 and a half, 12 million illegal immigrants is what we have here. And frankly, that's plenty. That's already way more than we should have in any modern society. And we need to do a better job of enforcing immigration laws so that not only do fewer illegal immigrants come in, but more of those who are here opt to go home. And both of those things happen all the time, but you have to sort of change the ratio so that the number coming in is less than the number leaving, so that you can have gradual attrition of the illegal population over time.
Mark in Tulsa, Oklahoma, independent. Mark?
Hello.
Morning.
Thanks for taking my call. Good morning. We talked before. This is the third time I've called the show. Let me say one thing about C-SPAN first before I get into this, man. You guys, I know you look at your ratings, and I guarantee the Washington Journal section, a 3-hour section you do on a daily basis, you're getting the highest ratings you could ever wish for. And then when you guys show midday the lackluster Congress and Senate debate over nonsense is a loser. I bet your ratings are zero-ish.
Well, let me stop you because we don't have ratings.
You have ratings. Don't lie to me.
We don't.
Come on, Greg.
We don't. We don't have advertisements, so we don't need ratings. We don't. We just don't have them.
Let me give your producers an idea. Make this a 24/7 show where people can call in, and then start letting them show their face when they're talking. But hey, enough of that. I'm just giving you a good idea and you should take it. But the thing is, and it's not me, it's other people. Forget about me. It's other people suggesting it. But the thing is, sir, let's get real. You just said that I've been listening to you for like the last 15, 20 minutes. You know that the more people that come into this country, the better it is. If you look at throughout human history, and we have a lot, we've been around a long time, we do better when we don't isolate ourselves. When we isolate ourselves, we get weak. And you know that. You even kind of started through the propaganda, oh, it's a net positive, because it's really a negative because the poor people, the families of these Mexican immigrants, they have to take care of them. And it's so dire for them because they're the ones that are kicking the law. And we just want to look.
Okay, Mark, what is the net, in your opinion, what evidence have you seen that this is good for the United States and the economy? Just explain that so that Mark Krikorian has something to respond to.
Well, Mr. Krikorian is a master. He has all the wisdom, first of all. If you look at his title below, he's Mr. Studies. He knows everything. He is the grandioso. But when you pin him down like you've tried to do, ma'am, he always starts to, well, if we just have a Republican Congress, everything will be great. And I'm no Republican, and I'm no Democrat. They're both pyramid schemes of nonsense. But I want to tell you something, sir. You're in the pyramid scheme of limiting our advancement in this country because the propagation that you advance. And I hear all these other people talk about
Mark, I'll jump in. Mr. Krikorian?
Sure.
You want to respond?
No, there's plenty to respond to there. And actually, the basic point is he's saying that immigration is necessary for our advancement and our improvement. And the fact is, some immigration does help, other immigration doesn't. And I would only point to the period from the 20s to the 70s when immigration was very low, because we have immigration sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low, as one of the periods where we actually did enormously well. I mean, we won World War II. We had the explosion of prosperity from the 50s. We went to the moon. None of these things had anything to do really with mass immigration. The fact is that we're always going to have some immigration. Isolating ourselves is not the point. The question is, do we dial it up or do we dial it down? And there was a interesting story from way back in the Carter administration where Jimmy Carter, President Carter, met with the Chinese leader. I think it was Deng Xiaoping at the time. And he criticized China's policies that limited emigration from China, that tried to limit the number of people leaving China, and said, you shouldn't do it. It's a violation of human rights, what have you. The Chinese leader looked Jimmy Carter in the eye and said, how many do you want? 10 million, 20 million, 30 million? We got them. The fact is that there is a possibility for too much immigration. If you think the number we have isn't big enough, then pick another number. But is there any number of immigrants that's too much? And if your answer is no, then essentially you're for unlimited immigration. And let's talk about that. I don't think unlimited immigration is a good idea, but let's vote on it. Nobody else does either, really. But that is if you will, that's kind of the bottom line. of a lot of people arguing for, for keeping our current immigration policy and expanding it, is that they say we shouldn't have limits on immigration. I disagree.
Let's hear from Anthony, Easton, Pennsylvania, Republican.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to know what's your take on other Republican and Democratic governors sending the National Guard to the border. Everybody seems to want the border secure. Why don't they take some relief off of the Texas National Guard and send their National Guard, the states of all these other states in the country, and give some relief to the Texas National Guard and the state of Texas?
Okay.
Good question. And actually, several states have done that. Last fall, I was at the other end of the Texas border, up near El Paso, and I encountered some Florida National Guard people there. So, and there's several other states that have done the same thing. The issue, though, is there's a limit to what the National Guard can do. You're not going to be shooting people crossing the border. That's kind of I'm not saying people are calling for that, but that's what people are thinking about. Use the military to protect the border. Superficially, that sounds like it should make sense. Of course, we have a military to protect the United States. The problem is we're not going to be shooting people who aren't armed, attackers of the here. And if not, then the National Guard, what they do is they're sort of eyes and ears. They keep the extra set of binoculars, sort of, and that's helpful. They do some transportation duty. In other words, they'll drive people that the Border Patrol arrests so that the agents themselves can keep patrolling. So sending National Guard to the border isn't useless or pointless, but it's only beneficial kind of at the margin. It's only a little bit helpful. We need to change the policies that are drawing illegal immigrants here, especially the ease of getting employment if you're illegal, or the ease that this administration is showing of just giving out work permits to people who are making these phony asylum claims. Until we do that sort of thing, it doesn't matter if all 50 states send their National Guards to the border. It's not going to be enough.
Mark Krikorian, the Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies. You can learn more if you go to CIS.org. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.